Hey everyone, welcome back to Window Seat Studies. I hope you all are doing well. So, we were discussing about neurobiology, in which we have already discussed the neuron doctrine given by Santiago Ramanujan, and we also discussed about the reticular theory given by Camillo Golgi, how they observed the nervous system using the Golgi stain, and what were the inferences that were made by them. Then we also discussed about neurons, the nerve cells, which are the signaling unit of our nervous system, as well as the glial cells, which support and protect them. The different type of glial cells, we covered all of them in the last class. Then we also discussed types of neurons based on the different properties that are exhibited by them. Okay, so the types were, the categorization was functional categorization, structural categorization, or based on what type of neurotransmitter they release or what is their conductive velocity, whether the conduction of nerve impulse is fast or slow. Depending on that, we saw what types of neurons are there which are present in our nervous system. In today's lecture, we are going to learn about how each nerve cell is a part of a circuit that has one or more specific behavioral functions. So we already know that when Santiago Kyle he observed neurons in the nervous system, or whether it was Golgi or Santiago Kyle, both of them exhibited and stressed on the point that nerve cells they do make connections, right? Santiago Kyle even gave the two principle, the principle of dynamic polarity and the principle of connectional specificity. So it was clear that nerve cells they do form connection. So we already know that it is they form connection, but that is not random. The nerve cell, the connections that are formed by nerve cell, they are actually the part of a circuit. So each nerve cell is a part of the circuit which is going to lead to certain behavior, one or more behavior, but that will be specific to that circuit. Okay, so and the best example of such circuits is the knee jerk reflex, which is a monosynaptic reflex arc. And I hope you have the basics of knee jerk reflex. If you don't, we'll explain it a bit in this lecture itself. So knee jerk reflex is the famous example of how a nerve cell is a part of circuit which is going to lead to a certain behavior. So this reflex, this helps in maintaining the balance and posture by responding to sudden muscle stretch. So have you ever been to a doctor and he checks your functioning and he just hammers your knee, right? So when he hammers your knee, he's actually hammering the tendon. Okay, so he's hammering the tendon, patella tendon. So you know that patella is knee bone. So he's actually hammering the tendon, and this leads to the stretching of the quads, the quadriceps muscles, the quadriceps femoris extensor muscles, which is going to lead to a sudden stretch. Okay, and that is this is what we call a reflex action. Okay, so what happens is that this reflex the knee, this is what we call as knee jerk reflex. This reflex is involved and it is involved in maintaining balance and posture. So when that sudden stretch is given, there is a sudden imbalance. Okay, and that imbalance is caused due to the stretching of quadriceps extensor muscles of your legs, and that is what we know as knee jerk reflex, because you're giving a sudden the movement is sudden jerky movement, and in this reflex arc there's no involvement of brain, only your spinal cord is involved. So this knee jerk reflex is monosynaptic response. Okay, it is monosynaptic reflex arc. So monosynaptic means there is only one synapse, means there is only one connection that is formed between neurons. So here is a schematic of the knee jerk reflex. So here you can see when the knee tendon is hammered, it is resulting into a jerk kind of movement. So this is what happens in your muscles. So when this tendon is hammered, it is connected to your muscle. Okay, and there are certain receptors which we call as muscle spindle receptors. Okay, muscle spindle receptors, which are located here. Okay, so what happens is that when the tendon is hammered, it results into stretching of your muscles. It results into a stretch of your quadriceps muscles, and this is sensed by muscle spindle receptors. So what happens is that stretching changes your length of the muscle, right? And that change in the length of muscle, that is sensed by the muscle spindle receptors, and those muscle spindle receptors, they carry out this sensation, the information to the sensory neurons through this to the spinal nerves. Okay, so here you can see that these are the muscle spindle receptors which are carrying out the information to the sensory neurons, and that is then going to form a synapse with a motor neuron. Okay, so this is a motor neuron. Okay, this one, let me show you. So this one is a motor neuron, while this one is the sensory neuron. Okay, so here you can clearly see that there is only one synapse formed between the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. So that is why this is called as monosynaptic reflex arc, because sensory neuron is directly forming connection with the motor neuron. Let me just erase this. Okay, here you can see there is a direct connection which is formed between the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. The sensory neurons which are involved in this reflex action, they are pseudo unipolar. Okay, when we were learning about types of neurons, we learned about pseudo unipolar neurons. Okay, so in those neurons, the axon is then the axon is branched into two processes. So axon branches into two arms. One is known as peripheral arm, while other is known as central arm. So this here you can see this. Here you can let me just change the color. Okay, here you can see this neuron. It is the axon of that neuron is branching into two arms. So one arm is known as peripheral arm, while this arm is known as central arm. So this peripheral arm, it is actually conducting the information, the sensory information from the muscle spindle receptor towards the cell body, and the central arm, on the contrary, it is conducting the sensory information from this cell body, and from whatever information is reaching to here cell body. That information then is further conducted by the central arm to the spinal cord, through the dorsal root ganglia. Okay, so what happens is that all the pseudo unipolar neurons, which are actually the sensory neurons, so all of those sensory neurons are pseudo unipolar. The cell bodies of those pseudo unipolar neuron, they aggregate here, and that is called as dorsal root ganglia. Okay, it is known as dorsal root ganglia of spinal cord. Okay, and this is how this sensory input is then further passed to the motor neurons, which is going to give the motor output to our muscles. So this single-handedly the whole arc is completed by one synapse, and that is why we call it as monosynaptic reflex arc. I hope you know this reflex arc information, but the topic of discussion for today is about the feedback loop and the feed forward inhibition loop. So what happens is that this circuit is actually a convergent circuit. Let me write it here. So this circuit is convergent circuit. Okay, so there are two types of circuits, or two types of connections that are formed by neurons: the convergent connections, and the divergent connection. Let me explain it with the help of a diagram. So here in the diagram, here you can see there are two different types of circuits which are formed by neurons, the two different types of connections. One is known as a divergent connection, while other is known as convergent connections. So the divergence, as the name suggests, something is diverging from one point. It is leading to the multiple, it is leading to multiple spots. So this is what we call as divergence. So what happens is that when a sensory information comes and it results into multiple motor outputs, okay, that is what we call as divergent circuit. While the convergent circuit means multiple sensory input comes together and then they result into a single motor output. That is what we call as the convergent circuit. Okay, so the circuit here, which is formed by the um, oh yeah, did I write convergent circuit? Oh yes, I'm sorry, pardon me, it's divergent circuit actually. Okay, so what happens is that a single so it is indeed a monosynaptic reflex arc, but a single sensory cue or a single sensory neuron can activate multiple motor neurons, which are in turn going to give the command to the quadriceps muscles for to quadriceps muscle for the contraction, and that is why this circuit is known as divergent circuit. Okay, so I hope the divergent and convergent circuits are clear to you all. So we were discussing about feed forward inhibition loop. So what happens is that for ensuring the smooth contraction, smooth extension of your leg muscle, uh, so I hope you know that there is always the two sets of the movement, like flexion and extension. So you can flex your muscles and you can extend your muscles, or there are two types of movement, sorry, the extension and flexion. So when the angle between the two bones is increased, that is what we call extension movement, while the angle is decreased, that we call as the flexion movement. And this extension and flexion movement, that is carried out by a set of muscles which are, which play antagonistic roles to each other. So while quadriceps extends, quadriceps, those muscles are extensor muscles which are going to result into the extension. So they are going to result into the extension of your leg, while the hamstrings is the antagonistic muscle. So for ensuring that the extension movement is very smooth and there is no conflicting movement, like at the same time you are stimulating extensor muscle and the flexor muscle, then the movement will be quite conflicting. So like you won't be able to keep the balance, and you won't be able to maintain your posture, and that can lead to some accidents, right? So we have to ensure that the extensor muscle is it is activated, it is contracted, while the hamstring muscle, it is inhibited. Okay, so this inhibition of the antagonistic muscle, the muscle which is antagonistic to extending muscle, the flexor muscle, inhibition of the flexor muscle by the help of inhibitory neuron, that is what we call as feed forward inhibition loop. Okay, so here what happens is that a sensory neuron, it activates the motor neuron to give the motor output to the quadriceps muscles. At the same time, the sensory neuron forms other connection with another neuron which is inhibitory in the nature. So it is going to inhibit the muscle which is going to play the antagonistic role. So even though we call it as a monosynaptic reflex arc, we call it as monosynaptic reflex because the muscle which is going to be controlled, that muscle that involve the that muscle is controlled by the neurons which are going to form single synapse. But instead of this, there will be other synapse as well, which is formed with the inhibitory neuron, which is going to inhibit the antagonistic muscle. Okay, so I hope this is clear to you all. Let me show you a schematic where it will be explained in a better manner. Okay, so this is the picture. This is the picture where it clearly shows what a feed forward inhibition is and what a feedback inhibition is. So inhibition means something is going to be inhibited, right? So feed forward inhibition, it is termed feed forward because it is ensuring that certain movement is going to be smooth. Okay, and for a certain movement to be smooth, you have to inhibit the antagonistic movement to that, right? If you want to extend if you want to do the extension of certain muscles, you have to assure that the flexion will be inhibited, and if such inhibition is going to result into the smooth movement. So it is inhibiting the conflicting movement, and that is why it is called feed forward inhibition. But on the contrary, feedback inhibition, it is required when the it is this is in the true manner inhibition, because it is inhibiting the same movement which is which is meant to happen, so that the overstimulation does not occur. Let me explain it in a different way. So in the feed forward inhibition, what happens is that there will be afferent neurons which are going to conduct the information from the periphery to the central nervous system. Okay, so the normal route, what the normal route of information is that afferent neurons, they will carry out the information from the peripheral part of the body to the central part of the body, and they are going to activate the extensor motor neuron, and that extensor motor neuron is going to give the motor output to the extensor muscle, and now the extensor muscle will contract and the extension will happen. Okay, so this is very clear, this flow of information is very clear. But what happens is that in feed forward inhibition, the second synapse is formed by afferent neurons. So like afferent neurons is sending its information to two different neurons. First, the extensor motor neuron for extension to happen, and on the other hand, it is also sending the information to an inhibitory neuron, which is going to form a synapse with the flexor motor neuron. Okay, so what happens is that the information is passed down to the extensor motor neuron to contract, and information is passed down to the inhibitory interneuron to, to inhibit the flexor muscle. So the two things are happening. Afferent neurons is conducting the information to two different muscles. First it is exciting, okay, first it is exciting extensor muscle. Okay, so for that it is forming the normal excitatory synapse. Okay, and while the other pathway is that it is sending its information to an inhibitory interneuron for inhibition of extensor muscle, sorry, inhibition of flexor muscle. Okay, so it's like when let me give you an example. It's like for ensuring you so you are so for a single, so both of the action, activating extensor muscle and inhibiting flexor muscle, both of the actions, they are going to result into the same output, right? So when you are activating extensor muscle and inhibiting flexor muscle, both of them are going to result into the extension. Okay, so whatever movement is meant to happen in this reflex action, that is ensured by first a positive signal by activating extensor, and other the negative signal inhibiting the opposite movement, and that is why it is known as feed forward inhibition. Why forward? Because you are ensuring that certain muscle movement goes smooth. So here you are, in this particular case, you are ensuring that the extension movement goes on smooth, and that is why, even though it is inhibition, why? Because we are inhibiting the flexor muscles with the help of inhibitory neuron. Even it is inhibition, it is not inhibiting your particular movement, it is actually helping that movement to be smooth, right? And that is why it is known as feed forward inhibition. Okay, so I hope that is clear to you all. Whenever feed forward inhibition is mentioned, it is always ensuring that you are inhibiting something which is antagonistic to what is meant to happen at that point of time. Okay, while on the contrary, in the feedback inhibition, the afferent neuron, which is going to activate the extensor muscle, okay, so the afferent neuron, it sends the signal to the extensor motor neuron, right? So what happens is that extensor motor neuron, it sends the information to extensor muscle for contraction, but it also forms one synapse with an inhibitory interneuron, which in turns inhibit the same motor neuron. So it's like whenever the stimulation is much more, like stimulus is more, so for avoiding the overstimulation of the same muscle, for avoiding the overstimulation of the extensor muscle, this inhibitory loop is formed. When it's like whenever you are feeding yourself at certain point of time, when you are full, you give the feedback that I am full, now let's just stop, and that signal is known as feedback signal, right? And this is an inhibitory signal for you to stop eating. This is in the same manner. The afferent neurons, they are carrying out the information from the periphery to the central nervous system, and now extensor motor neuron is activated. So extensor motor neuron, it is going to give the motor output, it is going to give the command to the extensor muscle to get activated. But what if the signal which is going to be which is coming from here, which is coming from afferent neuron, is too much and it is continuous signal? So now you have to avoid the overstimulation of the extensor muscle. You do not want to be in the extending movement for long, right? And for avoiding this, for avoiding the overstimulation of the extensor muscle, the extensor motor neuron, which is going to give the output to the muscle, it also forms a synapse with an inhibitory neuron, which is going to inhibit the same muscle, okay, which is going to inhibit the same neuron. So in that is why the same muscle, right? So this ensures that there won't be overstimulation. So whenever the one signal comes, now that signal has passed down to the motor neuron has given the command, the extensor muscle has it has contracted. Now this also forms an inhibitory neuron, so that this ensures that motor neuron won't send the continuous signal to the extensor muscle to extend, right? I hope the difference between feed forward inhibition and feedback inhibition is very clear. Feed forward inhibition is for it is for reassuring, or it is for maintaining the posture, and it does by ensuring the smooth contraction of the extensor muscle and the inhibition of flexor muscle. So feed forward inhibition, it ensures the smooth movement by inhibiting the antagonistic movement, okay? Well, on the contrary, feedback inhibition is the inhibition which ensures that there is no overstimulation of whatever muscle there it is there in the picture. So here it is the extensor muscle. Okay, so that's it for today. I hope it's very clear to you all. In next lecture, we will learn about the mechanisms by which the neurons, the signaling units of our nervous system, they are sending the information, how they are able to conduct the nerve impulses and all. We will also learn about depolarization, repolarization, all those technical terms. I mean, all those scientific terms. Till then, see you. Bye bye.